Let's take a look at default parameters in ES6. The default function parameters allow formal parameters to be initialized with default values if no value or undefined is passed. Let's take a look at what that looks like in code. In the first example, we're going to write a function that multiplies two numbers together. Takes in two numbers a and b, and then it console logs a times b. We can see what that looks like with 5 and 2, and 5 and 1, for example. So we should see 10 and 5. But what happens if we want to make this function be able to deal with a b that's either undefined or we don't pass one at all? Well, default parameters from ES6 allow us to do that. So what we can do is we can say this is equal to 10, for example, if nothing is passed in. So if we rerun this, 5 and 2 are passed in and 5 and 1 are passed in, we should see no change so far because 5 times 2 is still 10 and 5 times 1 is still 5. But what we can do now is we can say 5 times undefined, or 5 times we didn't pass another thing in, so then b would default to 10 and we should see 50. For another example, we can see another function. We'll do a greeter function, so we'll say const greet is equal to greeting and name, and we'll say console.log. We'll use simple literals we learned earlier, and we'll say greeting and then name. And so here, if we say greet, we pass in hello, and we pass in Robin, we should see hello Robin. But what happens if we want to default, say, name to John? Well, that's fine. So now if we do the same exact thing and we just say hello with nothing else, we should see hello John. And the second one, because we passed in two parameters, it won't use the default value and it should say hello Robin. And that's what it does. For the third example, we're going to show what it looks like when you default a function instead of defaulting a number or a string. So we're going to say const receive is an arrow function that takes in one parameter, and it takes the one parameter it takes in is a passed in function. And then inside of the function, we're going to say passed in function. We're just going to call it. So an example of that would be if I said const print rabbit equals an arrow function that takes no parameters, and then inside it would say console.log rabbit, and then what I want to do is I want to say receive, and I want to pass this in print rabbit. So what I would expect to see here is rabbit. What happens if I want to say if nothing is passed into receive, or if undefined is passed into receive, I want it to behave differently? So the way you can solve that is I can default the function up here if one is not passed in. So I could do that like this. If nothing is passed in for function, or if it's undefined, I want it to console.log kittens. And so in this example, if I pass it nothing on the second time, I should see kittens. I see rabbit on the first because I told it to receive print rabbit, but on the second one, since nothing is passed in, it will default to the function print kittens. I would rewrite this if it personally was my code. I think this is probably a little harder to read than it should be. So I would do something like this. I would say kittens. And then this would be kittens. And then instead of having the inline default function here, I would just say pass-in functions should be print kittens if nothing is passed in. I think this is a little easier to read for the same output or the same behavior.